Before we understand all the data structure and algorithm, it is good to understand the Python. And in this slide, I would like to explain the basic Python. Python is a kind of interpreted language. So every commands are executed through the Python interpreter. It means the interpreter receives a command, evaluates that command, and reports the result of the command. You are now a programmer. And when you are a programmer, you need to define a series of commands in advance and save those commands in the text file. When you save your comments in the text file, it is the source code. Or in Python, many people say as a script, Python script. In Python, you will see that the source code will be saved in a file name with .py. Okay. Usually, if you do with the Python in any environment, it will be .py. However, we are going to use this Jupyter notebook, and the file name will be .ipynb. It is for the Jupyter notebook. Okay, in our course, we will use Jupyter notebook, and the file name will be extended with ipynb. So let's say this is one example program. Okay. If you already know Python, I guess you are familiar with this kind of code. But if you are the first time to learn Python, I guess you may have some questions about what is the meaning by this one and that one. So we will learn at least the basic things in Python so you can understand this example program later. Okay. When we are doing with Python, we need to understand objects. The same as other programming languages like Java, C, C++, they are object-oriented. When you learn Java, Java is also an object-oriented language. Python is also an object-oriented language. And the classes forms the basis for all data types. It is more convenient compared to other programming languages because they have a very flexible on the data type. In Python, we need to understand there are some built-in classes for the data. We have the int. It is for integers. We call it the class int. And then we have the float class for floating point values. And we have str class for character strings. Do you still remember what is integer? Integer is a natural number, 5 or maybe 1,500. Okay, or you have kind of your income, let's say Ipek Manon, okay, and so on. So the number is a natural number, but float is a number with decimals. We have 5.5, or the temperature today is, let's say, 3.5 degrees Celsius. STR means the character strings, and every letters, characters, symbol, it can be string. Let's say I have my email abc.gmail.com. Okay. It can be also a character. In any programming languages, we also need to understand the identifiers. Most of the programming languages, they have similar rules to identify the identifiers, and they also have the similar rules to understand about the objects and how we can do some assignment statement. The most important of all Python commands is an assignment statement. This command establishes temperature as identifier. So this is one example. I guess you already know about variable. If we have a variable, so the variable will be a kind of identifier or a place to save value. Instead of identifier, we can say it as a name. We can also say as a variable, and it will associate with an object expressed on the right hand side. So in this case, I would like to say that the temperature equals to 98.6 degree. Maybe in this example, it is using Fahrenheit, because if it is Celsius, it is very high, it's very hot. And we know that this one is 98.6. If it is using decimal, then it is a floating point. Now, if I go to the I go to this Jupyter notebook, let me review a little bit about the way to execute your code. You already know how, if we want to print something, I want to print help. So you can just do print and then make the string up here. If you want to execute, you can press this button, or you can use Shift plus Enter. You can use Alt plus Enter. Okay. It's up to you. If you use the Shift Enter after you execute your code, because it is at the end of the cell, you will get a new cell. If you use Alt Enter, it will make also a new line or a new cell. So let's suppose we have the identifier temperature. When we have one variable name or an identifier, you can make any assignment. Let's say I want to just give 9.8. And then you can run, you can press Shift Enter, or you can press Alt Enter. It's up to you. Now, what is the value of temperature? When you run, it will show the value 9.8. So you don't need to consider the data type. As you know, the data type here is floating point. When you are using Java, if you still remember, we need to define the data type. Let's say in Java, we need to define double temperature equals to, this value is 9.8, and then you need to make the closing with the semicolon. In Python, the assignment is more dynamic or flexible. And once you have this temperature with 9.8, suppose you want to change the temperature equals to 11. And then if you have the temperature printed, then the value will be changed to 11. regardless your value is a float or an integer, Python will automatically change the data type. You can also do the statement with print for the variable. Let's say I have the print temperature, the result will be the same. In some cases, you need to do the print when you make a function later. Yeah, you need to print the variables on, you need to print something. Then yeah, we can do this statement. Like other programming languages, the identifiers should have a kind of rules. In Python, similar to Java, it is case sensitive. Okay? So the identifiers in Python are case sensitive. So temperature with small t and temperature with big T are distinct names. It is different. The identifiers can be composed of almost any combination of letters. So if it is letters, means A, B, C, D, E, F, G until Z. Numerals, you can have numbers, and underscore characters. Underscore means the underbar. If I want to write from temperature, then it is fine because it is underscore. But if you put with dash like this, it is not okay. This is we cannot make this kind of identifier. An identifier cannot begin with a numeral. You cannot use numbers as the beginning of the variable. And there are 33 specially reserved words that cannot be used as identifiers. This is the reserved words. There are so many reserved words. Here, I guess it is difficult to memorize for all. You don't need to memorize. If you have wrong identifiers, Python will give you an error message. For example, I want to make a variable from, you can see here, if you type from, then it will show the green color. So the green color means this is the Python reserved words. You cannot use for an identifier. You cannot use for variable. You need to change into another. For example, if you have from underscore temperature, then it is okay to be an identifier. If you make from dash, you can see the color is green and purple. So in this case, you cannot use an as an identifier. Or if you have a variable or an identifier starting with number, okay, then this is also not valid. So this is an invalid syntax. Okay. As I explained to you, the Python types is dynamic. Python is a dynamically typed language, as there is no advanced declaration associating an identifier with a particular data type. So you can define floating point, you can define integer, you can define string, you can define any kind of data type. An identifier can be associated with any type of object, and it can later be reassigned to another object of the same or different type. So I already give you one example, the temperature. Once I assign float value, I can reassign to integer value without any problems. Even though the identifier has no declared type, the object to which it refers has a definite type. So it means when we have this example about the 98.6 for the temperature, it is the floating point literal. We know this is decimal. Thus, the identifier temperature is associated with an instance of float class having that value. It will automatically to be in the float class. So the object is a process to create a new instance. I will explain in another section about the object-oriented, but in Python, there are some built-in classes to create an instance. We call this as the instantiation. To instantiate an object, we usually invoke the constructor of a class. If you still remember when you join the computer programming, okay, you will see a class name, let's say widget, and then you will make a new object with the parenthesis. We call this is an instance, and we call this is the class. This is assuming that the constructor does not require any parameters. If you have like W widget with no parameters, then you will just use the parentheses. If you have widget with one parameter, then you will include a value inside of the parentheses. If you have more than one parameters, let's say 5 and my name Bernardo, then yeah, you will have two values of the parameter. If the constructor does require parameters, we might use a syntax such as like this one. Okay, as I explained to you, in the parentheses, we will have some values for the parameters. And many built-in classes in Python is a literal form for designing a new instance. We have temperature equals to 98.6. What does it mean? Actually, it is a creation of new instance of the float class. We can see something like this one. The temperature equals to, let's say, 9.8. Okay. And then I can have the temperature equal to the float 9.8. Actually, the float here is the class name. So this is the built-in class. Okay, if I refer to this one, we have three built-in classes. Okay, so int, float, and str. So when we have any object, actually it refers to this specific built-in class. And Python is very dynamic, so you don't need to express it in your code. Maybe, for example, I have first text equal hello. It is a string. So this will be automatically creating an instance of a string or a text. And actually you can have same with the str hello. So the idea is the same. You will have hello. That's why many people like Python, because it's easy. It's more convenient to make a data. It's convenient to create an instance compared to other programming languages. When we are going to call methods, Python support functions, a syntax such as sorted data, in which case data is a parameter sent to the function. Python classes may also define one or more methods, also known as a member function, which are invoked on a specific instances of a class using dot. If you are later on, we have some data, and if the data is in the list, I will explain later about list. In the list, we have one method, and the method name is sort. So the idea is the same with other programming languages like Java, C, and other things. When we want to call the method, we need to invoke the method with dot. So this dot. So using the dot, it means we are going to execute the method. This particular method rearranges the content of the list so that they are sorted. So data is our value. Let's say we have 1, 2, 3, and then we will do the sorting. So sorting is a method, or it is a function to rearrange the value. Then we will just use dot to extend it. I will explain this one maybe a little bit later after we understand the basic data structure. Built-in classes. In Python, we have classes, and there are some classes which is immutable. So if its object of that class has a fixed value upon instantiation, it cannot subsequently be changed. So when you assign a value, then it will not be able to be changed. For example, the float class is immutable. The meaning by immutable, yeah, when you are changing the value, yeah, it is not the same as what we think. Okay. When we have the temperature equals to 9.8, and then when we can change the temperature into 11, okay, it seems that easy to be changed. But in the class by itself, actually it is not changed. Okay. It will be changed to another, like a memory address. Anyway, the concept of immutable, it will be a little bit complex to explain now. You will see with some examples later. And let's see one by one about these classes. Let's see these first three. Boolean. Do you know Boolean? It is true or false. In Python, you can define true. You can define false. Okay. And let's say if I have a variable is true, then yeah, I can also assign this as a value without defining the data type. Let's say I want to have a kind of comparison. 2 greater than 3. What is the result? Is it true or false? False. Then if I print, then the result is false. Without any conditional, we can get directly the result. Okay, thank you for your answer in the student who are in the WebEx. We can do with print to get the result. So both ways are fine. When I explain about the integer, float, string, you can use the class. Okay. So you can use the class integer. Okay. So it means, yeah, it is an integer value. And Boolean has also the class. Just bool. Okay. In this case, we need to assign one value to the variable b. What is the result? The default value is false. If you want to extend b, and if you want to change the value, then what will be the result? We want to give the value of x, okay, and x is false. Then b will be also false. There are many flexible things in Python, and because of this flexibility, sometimes we might have we might confuse how we need to type the comment. Okay. Int and float, yeah, all of them are immutable. The meaning by the immutable is when you assign this Boolean when you assign integer, when you assign float. So the value that you put here is immutable. You cannot change. But the value of this one, it is changeable. So we are going to learn also list tuple, str. str is also immutable. Tuple is also immutable. You cannot change. So we will see examples later. We have set, frozen set, and dictionary. So we will learn one by one. Okay, I already explained the Boolean. Okay. So it is logical values. It is 0 and 1, or true or false. And the only two instances of the class are expressed as the literals, true, false. And the default constructor is Boolean, returns false. Python allows the creation of Boolean value from a non-Boolean type. If we have a function, if suppose I have a variable or a function foo, so what I explained before, we have Boolean x. So it will automatically assign into that class. So the interpretation depends upon the type of the parameter. If numbers evaluate to false, if 0, and true if it is non-zero. Sequences and other container types such as strings and lists, it evaluates to false if empty and true if not empty. So we will also check this one. Do you still hear my voice if you are in the WebEx? Because I cannot hear my own voice here. Is it okay? Okay. Because I cannot monitor my voice. Okay, whenever you have problems, please let me know. Please do the chat. Okay. I cannot. Can you see my PowerPoint file in the screen? Okay. Okay. Cool. In my device, I cannot see my PowerPoint file. Okay, then let me just continue. We have integer class. What is the meaning by integer class? Yeah, you already know integer. So the integer means we want to design a integer value with arbitrary magnitude. Arbitrary magnitude means you can have a very long ranges, minus maybe millions until positive millions. The Python automatically chooses the internal representation for an integer based upon the magnitude of its value. Let's say I have integer with blank. It will return 0 by the default. And the integer constructor, we call it the constructor, it can also construct an integer value based on an existing value of another type. For example, if f represents a floating point value, then the syntax integer f will produce the truncated value of f. Let's see, integer 3.14, it will produce 3. And integer minus 3.9 will produce the value minus 3. We have integer with blank. Then there is the result, which is 0. If we have integer 9, then the result is 9. If I have integer 3.14, then the result will be only the integer value. How if I have integer 3.99? Yeah, we have only the integer value. It is not rounded. Okay, so we keep the integer value. If we have integer minus 3.99, it's also only the integer value, which is minus 3. And we can also see the constructor. It can also be used to parse a string. So it is very flexible. If you have the value like integer and I know the string is 256, for example, and then it will be automatically changed to integer value. If you still remember in Java, you need to make a long way to change the data type. Okay? Maybe if you remember, string to integer, integer to string, there are some methods on it. But here it is more dynamic and it's easier. In the float class, the float class is also similar to the integer class. They have many methods inside. So the float class is the floating point type in Python, and the floating point equivalent of an integral number. So 2 can be expressed directly as 2.0. I think in Java, in other programming languages, they also have the same. One other form of the literal for the floating point values use scientific notation. The scientific notation, it use the literal like this one, 6.022e 23. If you still remember, in Java, we also have the same. It means it represents 6.022 multiplied by 10 power 23. The constructor float returns 0.0. And it is the same with this the integer class. We can use the constructor float and it automatically returns the equivalent floating point value. If I input float 2, 2 is integer, but the result will be 2.0. If I enter a string 3.14 with the put, so it is a string, and it will return 3.14. Let's say I have 5. So it will give you 5.0. If I have 3.14, okay, then it will give you of float value 3.14. How if I have a very long value? 6022, like this one. Then it gives directly the scientific notation. It is 6.022 and so on, exponent plus 16. So it means the 10 power 16. There are 16 of zeros in these numbers. Okay, I think it's the time to have a break time. Let's have a break for 10 minutes. I'll continue after the break.